before I begin, this paper, I've been working on it almost 10 years. I mean, the initial trigger, the item that triggered my interest in the story I'm going to tell today, I discovered it almost 10 years ago. And I finished working on this. I mean, I've been doing Khazar since in the meantime, but I finished writing this paper, the full version of this paper, 2 weeks ago. It's 90 pages long, and therefore I faced the obvious difficulty of turning 90 pages long paper into a half-an-hour talk. I very much hope I will succeed. The second disclaimer is, since I've been working on it for almost 10 years, and many people in this room are my friends and colleagues and acquaintances, some of you heard bits and pieces of the story. Nobody here heard the entire story, so I hope it will be interesting even for those of you who know a little bit of what I am going to talk about. In 2006, while gathering material to my book on Frankism, I made a pilgrimage to the grave of the famous adventurer Giacomo Casanova. My interest in Casanova was triggered by my discovery of his correspondence with Eva, the daughter of the Jewish heresiarch Jacob Frank. A single letter from this correspondence was first published by Aldo Ravà in 1930 in a forlorn Italian periodical, and this letter was mentioned, but never systematically discussed, by both Casanova scholars and scholars of Frankism. While reading works by Casanova and about him, I learned that he had had numerous contacts with Jews, including with some who were Kabbalists. I also learned that Casanova's literary estate remains intact at the location where he labored over his memoir and died, the castle of Duchczow, or Dux if you prefer German to Czech, in Bohemia. I suspected that the estate might contain unpublished materials pertaining to the subject of my research, and therefore traveled there to make a first-hand examination. At the very entrance to the Dux castle, the portrait of a Christian nobleman, purportedly that of Casanova's patron and the lord of the castle in the final quarter of the 18th century, Count Joseph Karl Emanuel von Waldstein, caught my eye. The painting is a work of a rather mediocre anonymity. It portrays the young Waldstein in an informal setting. The sitter is dressed casually in a bright red gown thrown over an unbuttoned shirt, displaying part of his upper torso. He wears no wig, no jewelry, and no symbols of his noble status. Seated at a table, he holds an open book in his hand. A few additional volumes are stacked nearby. Indeed, if we did not know that the portrait was that of Count Waldstein, we could have easily assumed or surmised that it depicted a young scholar at a work in his study. Portraits of individuals either holding books in their hands or pointing at them are fairly common in European painterly and graphic traditions. Sometimes the books are generic representations meant to convey a general aura of learning. On other occasions, they allude to the sitter's identity, profession, or accomplishments. In such cases, they are commonly identified either by inscriptions on the cover or spine, or by a piece of text reproduced on the book's open pages. Hence, St. Jerome is conveniently portrayed working on the Vulgate, a physician holds a work of Galen, an architect peruses a copy of Vitruvius. In some relatively rare cases, one might identify not only the title of the book, but a specific edition, or a precise passage reproduced from the work represented. With the advent of the Enlightenment, books began to appear on portraits of noblemen or rulers who came to fancy themselves as poets, scholars, or philosophers in their own right, or who were believed to have embodied the ideas of scholars, poets, and philosophers in their actions and policies. A good example from the proximate geographical area and time period of the Dux painting is Pompeo Batoni's double portrait of Joseph II and Leopold II, Leopold the Duke of Tuscany at this point, in which the emperor casually rests his hand on the second volume of Montesquieu's newly published De l'Esprit de la Loi. In some sense, the Waldstein portrait might belong to this tradition. However, whereas Joseph II is shown with a copy of Montesquieu, thus expressing his sympathy for the novel ideas of the Enlightenment, Waldstein is portrayed with an entirely different kind of book. As I immediately noticed, upon entering the Duchczow castle, the book in the hands of the Count is written in the Hebrew script. This is the book. Most books appearing in early modern paintings and etchings were Latin or less often Greek classics, or, alternatively, newly published works in European vernaculars. Depictions of Hebrew books were mainly that of the Bible, usually executed in rather simplistic fashion, sometimes even in a pseudo-Hebrew script. I mean, characters which are supposed to resemble Hebrew letters. But, you know. Aside from the Bible, some books employing Hebrew script can be found in the portraits of Christian Hebraists. A case in point is the engraving of Carlo Giuseppe Imbonati, reproduced on the frontispiece of his Biblioteca Latina Ebraica. Here you have it. Imbonati is pictured pointing to a schematically rendered book bearing the Hebrew title of his work, Magen v'Charev v'Milchama. I am not aware of any other early modern work of art that went beyond this very sketchy representation and attempted to produce a faithful depiction of a concrete book written in Hebrew, let alone a representation allowing the viewer to identify a concrete edition. Neither am I aware of a work of art that reproduced a specific passage from a Hebrew book other than a biblical verse. And this sentence is actually not true. There is a counterexample, but I'm maybe going to get to this in the discussion. But as a general principle is, even the emergence of the rabbinic portrait, a late genre that did not develop until the 18th century, did not affect much of a change in the typical portrait and its message. While books are commonplace in rabbinic portraits, these usually signify general attributes of scholarship and are frequently illegible. In the very few cases in which their titles can be made out, these books are schematically depicted works authored by the sitter. To the best of my knowledge, no attempt to represent a precise text has ever been made in such a portrait. Against this backdrop, the Waldstein portrait is highly unusual. One can clearly identify the title of the book, its specific edition, and the precise passage taken from it. What Waldstein has in his hands is the first volume of the 1558 Mantova edition of the Zohar. Here you have it. The page is divided into two parallel columns. The right one begins a section of the Zohar on the Torah portion Hayei Sarah, while the left one depicts the corresponding section of the Midrash HaNe'elam. The volume is open to folio 127 recto. Here you can see the foliation. Yeah, here you can see the foliation, which helps the. Actually, if you could, turn down the lights a little bit, it might be better off. Right, so here you can see Midrash HaNe'elam. And this one here you have Hayei Sarah, which is basically this page. And it's, as I said, it's the Mantova edition. And the Aramaic text is perfectly legible. Since the artist, in a manner that is certainly unprecedented and perhaps even unique, took such pains to reproduce the exact text, I believe that he meant to convey more than just the depth of the sitter's learning in obscure Jewish traditions or his general interest in Kabbalah. I shall assume that the selection of the specific passage was not coincidental and was meant to convey a concrete message to the viewer. In an attempt to understand this message, I shall briefly discuss the section of the Zohar that is depicted in Count Waldstein portrait. The fragment of the Zoharic text that appears in the painting is the very end of a large narrative that begins a few pages earlier. The narrative recounts a dialogue between Rabbi Yitzchak and Rabbi Yossa that took place during a walk the two took from Tiberias to Lydda. The starting point for the conversation was provided by Rabbi Yitzchak's amazement, it's a quotation from the Zohar, at the figure of the biblical sorcerer Balaam. According to Rabbi Yitzchak, from the story of Balaam we may, as he puts it, again another quote, learn a mystery. It teaches us that every act of sorcery is possible only through its intrinsic connection to the primordial serpent, the spirit of impurity. Whoever wants to obtain the power of the impure spirit must first defile himself. Thus, in order to practice sorcery, Balaam defiled himself every night by engaging in sexual acts with his donkey. Rabbi Yitzchak proceeds to describe details of the rituals of witchcraft as performed by Balaam. The developing conversation touches upon the question of the origin of impurity, which began with the injection of the primordial serpent's slime into Eve, its subsequent diffusion throughout humanity, its cessation among Israel during the giving of the Torah on Sinai, and its return after the Golden Calf episode. The final chord of the dialogue is the pronouncement of the Rabbi Yitzchak, which is reproduced on the Waldstein portrait in extenso. And this is what I'm interested in. And I'm quoting it in English. You will get the transcription of the Hebrew, of the Aramaic in a second. And every impure spirit clings to the serpent before... Actually, I will give you the transcription. And every impure spirit clings to the serpent before arriving in the world. No one in the world escapes him, for he manifests in everything until the time that the blessed Holy One eliminates him from the world. As it is written, he will swallow up death forever, which is Isaiah 25:8, and is also on... and further, I will eliminate the spirit of impurity from earth, and which is the pasuk which appears also on the final page of Kabbalat Data. Okay. Now, while the duck's painting reproduces this entire passage, the sitter points to one specific sentence in the right column, around the middle of the painted page. Right? So this is what you have highlighted here. Is the sentence to which Waldstein is actually pointing. Right? For he manifests in everything, he is the spirit of impurity. Manifests in everything until the time that the blessed Holy One someday eliminates him from the world. This is the sentence which is interesting. Now, as we remember, the section of the Zohar, the end of which appears on the duck's painting, begins with the promise that we may learn a mystery. If there is a mystery hidden in the picture, the key to it may be provided by the sentence to which Waldstein is pointing. Alas, the words of the Zohar themselves merely hint at secrets. They do not reveal their content. We must look for more clues. As it happens, the portrait provides one more clue, which explicitly mentions secrets or mysteries. At the right bottom corner of the picture, at the very edge of the table at which the count is sitting, one may see a small brass plaque. Actually, if we go back, it's right here. It's not a very photograph. This is what I'm talking about. One may see a small brass plaque with an Arabic inscription. Asrar Muhammad al-Rasul. The mysteries of Mohammed, the messenger. Now, I believe that the portrait suggests, what the portrait suggests is that the mystery that the Zohar promises to teach us is somehow connected, or maybe is tantamount, to the mystery of Muhammad the messenger, and that this mystery refers to the ultimate elimination by God of the spirit of impurity from earth. Al-Rasul, the messenger, or maybe the apostle, is the standard appellation of Muhammad in the Quran. It appears, for instance, in the Surah Al-Imran 3:144, which asserts that Muhammad is only a messenger of God, thus denying his divinity. However, as I have been assured by my learned colleagues, the phrase "the mysteries of Muhammad the messenger" is by no means standard. In fact, insofar as I was able to ascertain, it does not appear in any Muslim source, and it ranks strangely in the ears of most of the scholars of Islam whom I consulted. The Jewish commentaries on the Zohar that were in circulation in Waldstein's times also do not contain anything that would help us to solve the mystery of the passage that appears on the portrait. Rabbi Shalom Buzaglos' Mikdash HaMelech does not even mention the section in question. Rabbi Shimon Labi's Ketem Paz treats it in a very cursory way. Cordoveros Or Yakar also brings nothing that would allow us to link it to the mysteries of Mohammed the Messenger. None of the works of Christian Kabbalah that I am familiar with touch upon the section of the Zohar reproducing the expanding ether. Neither the classic Jewish Kabbalistic commentaries, nor the tracts authored by Christian Kabbalists contain any occurrence of the name of the founder of Islam. As far as I know, there is only one type of source from the period which mentions Muhammad by name and discusses the mysteries of the Zohar. These are works of Sabbatian Kabbalah composed in the Ottoman Empire after the conversion of Shabtai Tzvi to Islam. In these works, the name of Muhammad and the Zoharic mysteries are sometimes invoked in discussions of Shabtai's complex relationship to his adopted religion and, more broadly, the non-Jewish world. In an attempt to shed some light on the iconography of Count Waldstein's portrait, I shall bring here a passage from the commentary on the Psalms composed by Rabbi Israel Chazan of Castoria, one of the most important disciples of Shabtai Tzvi's prophet, Nathan of Gaza. And this is what you have on your handout. Now, since it's full of gematriot, it doesn't flow. So I want to read the text. You have the text in front of you, either in the original or in the English translation. I will just interpret what you have there. All right. Israel Chazan in this passage discusses mysteries, mentions the name of Muhammad, and touches upon the quality of being a messenger. Right? So you have mysteries, you have Muhammad, and you have messenger. The text is structured as a Kabbalistic exegesis of verse 23 of the 49th chapter of Isaiah. Kings will be your foster fathers, and their queens your nursing mothers. They will bow down before you with their faces up to the ground, and they will lick the dust at your feet. Chazan invokes this verse in order to develop the notion that, with the advent of the end of days, the non-Jews, and in particular non-Jewish authorities, will also recognize Shabtai Tzvi as the true Messiah. Kings will be your foster fathers is taken as denoting the rulers of the Gentiles, who will become believers in Shabtai Tzvi and patrons of his faithful, drawing upon the Kabbalistic idea that the reign of every earthly ruler is only possible thanks to his deriving energy from the corresponding ruler or guardian on high. Israel Chazan interprets the second part of the verse, their queens will be your nursing mothers, as referring to the recognition of Shabtai's messianic mandate also by the inhabitants of the angelic, or in this case demonic, realm. The acceptance of Shabtai Tzvi by the kings of this world is possible only because a profound change has taken place in the higher worlds. The demonic rulers of the earthly rulers are turning to good with great love. They are identified as Samael and Rachav. Whose guardians are they? In order to answer this question, Chazan points to the mystery revealed by his teacher, Nathan of Gaza, in connection with a Talmudic dictum quoted here as not for nothing did the starling follow the raven. Already in the original context of the tractate Baba Kama, this dictum, which has a slightly different form in the Talmud, and I will return to it, is predicated upon the biblical verse, so Esau went to Ishmael, Genesis 28:9. Esau and Ishmael are traditional emblems of Christianity and Islam respectively. In Kabbalah, the former is symbolically associated with the most cruel bird, the raven, while the latter is represented by the starling. It would seem that the recognition of Shabtai Tzvi as the true Messiah by the non-Jews means his recognition by Muslims and Christians. Yet it is not so simple. The string of associations linking Samael, Esau, raven, and Christianity on the one hand, and Rachav, Ishmael, starling, and Islam on the other, are not Sabbatian innovations. They are attested by several earlier Kabbalistic works, for instance by Rabbi Natan Shapira's Megalei Amukot and Rabbi Shimshon of Ostropol's Sefer HaKarnai. It seems unlikely that Israel Chazan would hail them as special mysteries revealed by Nathan of Gaza and Shabtai Tzvi. If anything, Hazan's account spoils the neatness of the scheme established by earlier Kabbalists. According to Nathan of Gaza, as quoted by Hazan, Shabtai Tzvi interprets the Gematria concerning the starling with Rahav as referring to the uncircumcised, that is to say, the Christians, and not, as would one expect, the Muslims. On the other hand, the last section of the fragment, which you have in front of you, links the symbol of the raven with Arabs, which is a synecdoche for Muslims, rather than with Christians. This inversion of the valences of symbols is strengthened by Hazan's inversion of the phrase from Baba Kama. In the Talmud it reads, "Not for nothing did the raven follow the starling." In Hazan, "Not for nothing did the starling follow the raven." Now, and here comes the most disappointing sentence of this paper. Within the framework of this presentation, I cannot get into the more extensive discussion of this passage. What I will say is this. Not only did the Ottoman Sabbatian eschatology develop a doctrine of the adulation of Shabtai Tzvi by non-Jews in Messianic times, it also expounded a notion of a fundamental change in the mutual relationship between Islam and Christianity. In a nutshell, Shabtai Tzvi's acceptance as the true Messiah by Muslims and Christians, according to this view, will not happen in one stroke. Shabtai will be first recognized by the former and only subsequently by the latter. Indeed, Israel Hazan's commentary contains some first-hand accounts of Muslim Sabbatians of non-Jewish origin and treats the first stage of this process as partly accomplished. The second stage, however, the spreading of Sabbatianism in the Christian world, involves a profound shift in the worlds on high. Samael, the guardian of Esau and of Christians, will become the guardian of the Ishmaelites, where Rahav will become the warden of Christendom. This change in the spiritual world will also have an important this-worldly dimension. It will involve the political triumph of Christianity over Islam. This is indicated by Hazan's inversion of the Talmudic dictum about the raven and the starling. In primordial times, Esau went to Ishmael. In the time of the true redemption, Ishmael will come to Esau. The Muslim countries, in particular the Ottoman Empire, will be taken over by Christian kingdoms. In light of the wider Sabbatian doctrine, the final sentences of the passage from Israel Hazan do not refer, as they may seem at first glance, to the Muslims falling under the rule of and becoming servants of the Sabbatians. It refers rather to their being subjugated by the Christians. It is a peculiar Sabbatian inversion of the master-slave dialectic. Just as Shabtai Tzvi let himself be subjugated by Ishmael and converted to Islam in order to turn Muslims into his faithful believers, so the conquest of Ishmael by Esau will lead to the spreading of the gospel of the true Messiah in the Christian world. This is the ultimate mystery of Mohammed. At the end of times, Muslims will become messengers or apostles of Shabtai Tzvi among the believers of Jesus. I submit that Sabbatian Kabbalistic speculation provides the most fitting key to unlock the secret of the iconography of the Waldstein portrait. I do not wish to claim that Count Waldstein or the anonymous artist who executed the painting studied the works of Israel Hazan of Astoria on some other Sabbatian Kabbalist. But I believe I can establish an actual historical connection between the Count and someone intimately familiar with the world of Sabbatian Kabbalah. If we invert the Duke's painting, on the back of the picture we'll see a German inscription identifying the sitter and giving a brief account of his life. This is the inscription and this is the transcription of the inscription. Again, for the lack of time, I will not read it. It was added later. There are problems with this inscription, but what I am really interested is this sentence, which basically says that Waldstein studied Hebrew writings in the context of his activities as Freemason. The inscription on the reverse side of the Duke's painting was. We still need to run for another 3 pictures. The inscription on the reverse side of the Duke's painting was added after the death of the sitter. I will skip it. Okay. What is of chief importance here is the suggestion that Count Joseph Karol's study of Hebrew was somehow linked to his Masonic activities. I shall treat as a point of departure for the rest of my discussion. Was Waldstein a Freemason? Who were his Masonic friends? Did they study Hebrew and Aramaic, and in particular Kabbalah and the Book of the Tsar? The standard monograph of 18th century Czech Freemasonry, written by Jan Podszkubka, does not mention Count Waldstein. However, this does not mean much. Only part of the Waldstein estate is extant, and the answer to the question of his Masonic activities might be partial. Among the extant documents in the Waldstein estate, particular attention should be paid to the Count's correspondence with another aristocrat. The name of this aristocrat is Baron von Adlerstal. In March 1762, a young Jew by the name of Wolf Benjamin left his home city of Altona and moved to Saxony, where he became a court agent of Elector Frederick Augustus. He purchased a country estate in the village of Prisnitz near Dresden. This is how it looks. It's still standing. This is his country house. A day's journey from Dorchev, as well as a palace in the city itself. The palace was torn down in the mid-19th century, but there are descriptions. Again, there is one funny description in Rabbi Yaakov Emden, but I will skip it for the second. So this is his house. After spending several years in Saxony, he petitioned Emperor Joseph II to be granted the imperial title of Baron and to have the designation von Adlerstal added to his name. And here is his coat of arms, on which I am writing a separate paper. He stated that he owned several estates and intended to purchase more properties in German lands. In his petition, the issue of his religious affiliation went unmentioned. Joseph II accepted the plea, and the noble patent for Jonas Freiherr Wolf von Adlerstal was issued by the Habsburg administration. However, before Wolf Benjamin managed to lay hands on the document, the authorities realized that the petitioner had concealed his Jewish origins and demanded that the patent not be accorded to him before, I quote, he publicly acknowledges his entering the Christian faith. After some hesitation, he decided to remain faithful to Judaism and hence never collected the writ of nobility. Nevertheless, he told Elector Frederick Augustus that he had been granted the title by the empire. He stated that current circumstances did not allow him to make it public and only requested certain freedoms not ordinarily allowed to the Jews. Popular opinion persistently credited him with the title of Baron and in some cases linked acquisition of the title with conversion to Christianity. In Dresden, he became a familiar figure among the city elites. He had a splendid equipage harnessed with expensive harness and a brigade of servants wearing special liveries bearing his coats of arms. No longer a Jew, he became a true Freemason, fake aristocrat, and, on occasion, a fake Christian. Wolf Benjamin was the youngest son of Rabbi Jonathan Eibeshutz, arguably the greatest rabbinic scholar of the 18th century and the alleged Sabbatean heretic. Elsewhere, I have discussed various aspects of his activities. Today, I shall only quote one fragment of a testimony from the late 1770s, published by Rabbi Yaakov Emden in his Sefer Cult. And I quote Emden, and this criminal, reveals secrets and mysteries of the Torah also to non-Jews, especially to aristocrats. And there is even one nobleman who knows by heart a few pages from the Zohar, and he goes around reciting them all the time. End of quote. Now, I do not know who the aristocrat mentioned in this testimony is, and have no reason to think that it refers specifically to Count Waldstein. What I do know is that in the late 1770s and the early 1780s, there existed a circle of Prussian, Saxon, and Austrian Freemasons who harbored interest in Kabbalah and studied it together with Wolf Eibeshutz. The group met in Wolf's house at irregular intervals, and its existence is attested by the letters regular exchange between Wolf Eibeschütz, or Baron von Adlerstal, and Count Joseph Karl Emanuel von Waldstein. Are we still on? We're not. No, I think we're short of power. Okay, I want to show you the letters between Wolf Eibeschütz and... Okay. In any case, you have to trust me, there are letters between Waldstein and Wolf. There is correspondence between... so far, I've managed 227 letters between Wolf Eibeschütz and Count Joseph Karl Emanuel von Waldstein.
Written in what language?
In German and French. Most of them in German, some of them in French. And he's perfectly fluent in both. While most of these letters are fairly bread and butter correspondence, reflecting mainly commercial interest, they do allow us to say a little bit about the membership of the group and its activities. As for the former, we'll wait for the...
Wolf's money all made in these kind of...
Answer during the discussion. We are on. Okay. So yeah, these are the letters. Actually, if you are fond of reading Sholem, here's another person. Some of you might be familiar with, who's also coming up in this correspondence. It's Moses Dobrushka. I mean, it's in this particular letter, it's his mom, but Sholem wrote a paper. Okay, so we have 227 letters, and they, on this basis, we can say something about the group that met at Wolf's house and studied Kabbalah. As for the membership of the group, the Eibeschütz-Waldstein correspondence reads like a Habsburg, Saxon, and Prussian who is who. And here you have a tentative list of the names that appear in this correspondence. And it includes prominent Habsburg aristocrats, two Counts von Waldstein, Duke Franz de Paula von Hartig, Count Thunen Hohenstein, Prussian officials, Count Albrecht Heinrich von Arnim, who is the Prussian ambassador to the court of Saxony, Johann Rudolf von Bischofswerder, who is the head of the Berlin Rosicrucians. And actually the connection with Bischofswerder is quite important for the story, but it's another story. Well, the Jewish financiers, the Prussian court banker Daniel Itzig, the Vienna bankers Nathan Arnstein, Bernard Esclas, so on and so forth. Okay, let's finish. As for the activities, the group engaged in the extensive study of Kabbalistic texts, including the most notorious work of Sabbatian Kabbalah, the heavily antinomian tract Va'avo Hayom El Cha'ai. The tract was composed in the early 1720s by Wolf Eibeschütz's father, Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschütz, and young Wolf wrote a brief commentary on it during his years in Altona, before coming to Dresden. In the 1770s, in his incarnation as Baron von Adlerstal, Rabbi Yonatan's son translated large sections of his father's works into German for the use of his Masonic students. So basically what you have here, is the translation of the section of Va'avo into German by Wolf. Let me sum up. Wolf Eibeschütz's commentary on Va'avo Hayom El Cha'ayin has been published by Yuda Liebes, who also demonstrated that it contains an unusual quantity of material deriving from the Ottoman Sabbatian teachings otherwise unknown among European followers of Shabtai Tzvi. It is known that at the age of 15, and at the request of his father, Wolf Eibeshitz undertook a journey to the Balkans and Salonika. The purpose of the journey was precisely to bring the oral esoteric teachings of Turkish Sabbatians to their brethren in the Christian world. Now, I believe that what young Wolf Eibeshitz taught his fellow Sabbatians, the elder Baron von Adlerstal taught his fellow Freemasons. As it would seem, among these teachings was the notion of the mysteries of Mohammed the Messenger, the subjugation of the world of Islam by Christian powers, which would be the penultimate accord in the messianic drama leading to the recognition of the true Messiah, Shabtai Tzvi, by Jews, Muslims, and Christians. I believe that the Dukhchev painting, a portrait of a prominent Christian aristocrat holding the most important book of the Jewish esoteric canon and bearing an Arabic inscription mentioning the name of Muhammad, is a part of this story. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paweł.